Welcome to Mr.VinzTales, where enchanting stories come to life to guide you gently into a peaceful slumber. Tonight, I invite you to relax, unwind, and let your imagination drift as I share a soothing bedtime story crafted to ease your mind and calm your soul. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a tale. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let the journey to dreamland begin. Our first tale is The Prince Medallion. The grand halls of Castle Esroda were filled with an uneasy silence. King Athelred lay on a bed of silk and gold, his breathing shallow. His two sons stood by his side, Gin, his youngest, with eyes full of concern, and Empy, his elder, a shadow of ambition in his gaze. "Father, you must rest," Gin pleaded, kneeling beside the king. "Your strength will return." Athelred placed a trembling hand on Gin's shoulder. "My son, I fear my time is short. Esroda needs a ruler strong enough to carry its burdens." Empy stepped forward, his voice smooth. "And that ruler must be decisive, father. The people need a king who can act swiftly and without hesitation." The king's eyes flickered between his sons. "Perhaps you are both right, but how can I choose? The medallion of valor, it alone can determine who is worthy." Gin's brows knit in confusion. "The medallion? But that's guarded by the dragon Rifarix. It's a death sentence." MP smirked. Death sentence for some, perhaps. For others, an opportunity to prove their mettle. The king silenced them with a raised hand. "The one who brings me the medallion shall be my heir. Go, my sons, prove your worth." As Gin left the chamber, MP lingered, leaning close to the king. "You'll see, father, Gin's soft heart will be his undoing." Gin spent the evening in the castle library, poring over dusty tomes. He found an entry on Rifarix, the golden dragon who had guarded the medallion for centuries. It read, "The dragon tests not strength, but the heart. Greed, deceit, and cruelty shall be met with fire." "Strength of heart," Gin murmured. "Perhaps there's hope for me after all." Sylvia, the castle healer, entered, carrying a small bundle. "You'll need more than hope, your highness. Take this." She handed him a pendant inscribed with protective runes. "What is this?" Gin asked. "It's an old charm of protection. It might keep you safe from harm, but only if your intentions are pure." Meanwhile, MP gathered a group of rugged mercenaries in the castle courtyard. "Follow him," he commanded. "Make sure his path is fraught with danger. The medallion will be mine." One mercenary hesitated, and if he doesn't survive, MP's smile was cold. "Then that simplifies things, doesn't it?" Gin's journey began at the edge of the cursed forest, where twisted trees loomed like skeletal hands. As he entered, the air grew thick with an unnatural fog. "Keep moving," Gin whispered to himself, but soon he heard whispers, soft, mocking laughter that seemed to come from every direction. Suddenly, a group of men burst from the shadows. The leader sneered. "Well, if it isn't the young prince, lost are we?" Gin's hand went to the hilt of his sword. "Who are you?" "Just some concerned citizens," the man replied, drawing his blade. "Your brother sends his regards." Before they could attack, a rustling noise came from the underbrush. A fox darted out, baring its teeth. The mercenaries laughed, but the fox sprang at one, biting his arm. Taking advantage of the chaos, Gin ran. He stumbled into a hidden glade, where the fox followed him. "Thank you," Gin said, kneeling. "I owe you my life." To his surprise, the fox spoke. "You'll owe me more than that if you plan to survive this forest." Gin blinked. You talk?" "Of course I talk. My name is Silas, and if you want to reach the Forbidden Peaks alive, you'll need my help." Gin and Silas arrived at the Bridge of Truth, its surface shimmering like glass over a chasm of swirling mist. A spectral knight stood guard, his eyes glowing blue beneath his helm. "Who dares attempt the crossing?" the knight boomed. "I am Gin of Esroda," the prince replied. "I seek the medallion of valor." "To cross this bridge, you must confront your deepest fears," the knight intoned. As Gin stepped onto the bridge, the mist below twisted into a vision. He saw himself failing his father, the kingdom crumbling under Empi's rule. Voices whispered, "You're too weak, too kind. You'll never be enough." Gin clenched his fists. "I may be afraid, but fear will not define me." The mist cleared and the bridge glowed. The knight bowed. "You may pass." Moments later, Empi arrived, furious. "Out of my way, ghost!" The knight's eyes narrowed. "Face your truth or fall." "I have no time for games!" Empi roared, slashing at the bridge. It cracked beneath him, and he barely escaped with his life. Gin's journey brought him to a hidden village at the base of the Forbidden Peaks. Its people, descendants of ancient guardians, welcomed him cautiously. An elder named Mael approached. "Why have you come, Prince?" "I seek the medallion to unite my kingdom," Gin replied. Mael studied him. "Many have sought it, but none returned. The dragon tests the heart, not the sword." Meanwhile, Empi sneaked into the village, spreading lies. "Gin seeks the medallion for himself. He'll abandon you to Rifarix's wrath." The villagers grew uneasy, but Mael silenced them. "We shall see who speaks the truth." Gin climbed the icy peaks with Silas. Traps littered the path, collapsing ledges, magical barriers and riddles etched into the stone. One gate bore an inscription, "What does a king value most?" Gin thought for hours before answering, "The well-being of his people." The gate opened, revealing the path ahead. Empi, impatient and reckless, forced his way up another route, his men falling victim to the mountain's magic. The summit was a cavern of shimmering gold. Rifarix emerged, his golden scales glowing like molten fire. "Who dares disturb my slumber?" the dragon rumbled. Gin stepped forward. "I am Gin, Prince of Esroda. I seek the medallion." Rifarix narrowed his eyes. "Why do you seek it?" "To bring unity to my kingdom," Gin replied. "Not for power, but for peace." Empi burst in, sword drawn. "Enough talk! The medallion is mine!" Rifarix roared, unleashing a torrent of flames. Gin leapt between his brother and the dragon, shielding Empi. "Please, spare him!" The dragon paused. Selflessness, rare indeed. The medallion emerged from Rifarix's chest, glowing with a pure light. "Take it, young prince. You have proven your worth." Empi fell to his knees, trembling. "Why? After everything I've done, why save me?" Gin looked at him with sorrow. "Because you're my brother." Empi wept. "I was wrong. You deserve the crown." Gin returned to Esroda with the medallion. The people celebrated, their faith in him restored. Empi pledged to serve as Gin's advisor, working to undo the harm he had caused. The grand hall of Castle Esroda had never shone so brightly. Banners of crimson and gold hung from the towering arches, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers. Nobles and commoners alike filled the chamber, murmuring in anticipation. At the center of it all stood Prince Gin, clad in ceremonial robes of deep blue trimmed with silver, the medallion of valor resting on his chest. King Athelred, frail but resolute, sat upon the throne. His once vibrant face was pale, but his eyes held a glimmer of pride. "Today," he said, his voice steady despite his weakness, "we crown a king not merely of blood, but of heart." As the ceremony began, Mael, the elder from the hidden village, stepped forward, holding an ancient staff adorned with glowing runes. Her presence was a surprise to many. "Before the crown is placed, let us honor the bond between Esroda and the guardians of old," Mael intoned. "For it is by the wisdom of the ancients that we recognize true leadership." Prince Gin stepped forward. Gin knelt before her, head bowed. "I am ready." Mael leaned in, her voice soft yet powerful. "The medallion has chosen you, but know this, the crown is not a prize, it is a burden. Do you accept it, knowing it will demand your all?" Gin raised his head, meeting her gaze. "I do, not for myself, but for the people who place their trust in me." A murmur of approval rippled through the hall. Mael smiled faintly, stepping back to let King Athelred rise. With trembling hands, the king lifted the crown of Esroda. "Gin, Athelred said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my son, but more importantly, you are the son of this kingdom. Wear this crown as a servant of the people, and let their needs guide your every decision." The crown descended onto Gin's head, its weight both physical and symbolic. The hall erupted into cheers, voices united in celebration. Later that evening, as the festivities continued, Gin stood on the castle balcony overlooking the city. Below, torches and lanterns lit the streets, and laughter echoed through the night. MP approached quietly, his expression subdued. "You did it," MP said, his voice low. "You've earned their love." Gin turned, studying his brother. "We did it. I couldn't have succeeded without your challenge. You forced me to grow." MP laughed bitterly. "I forced you to fight for survival. I nearly destroyed everything. And yet you stand here now, willing to make amends," Gin said. "That's what matters." He placed a hand on MP's shoulder. "Help me rebuild, brother. Be my advisor. Together we can make Esroda stronger than ever." MP hesitated before nodding, tears brimming in his eyes. "I will, I swear it." In the weeks that followed, Gin wasted no time implementing change. He visited every village and city, listening to the needs of his people. He enacted reforms to ensure fairness, justice, and prosperity. MP, true to his word, worked tirelessly at Gin's side, using his cunning to outmaneuver corrupt nobles and strengthen alliances. One day, while visiting the hidden village, Mael approached Gin with a curious smile. "The medallion," she said, pointing to the artifact he now wore as a symbol of his reign, "has chosen well. But remember, even the strongest hearts must rest. Do not lose yourself in the crown's weight." Gin nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mael. I will remember." Years passed, and Gin's reign became a golden age for Esroda. The people thrived, the lands flourished, and peace reigned. Stories of the prince who faced a dragon, saved his brother, and united a kingdom became legend. Gin, now older and wiser, stood in the royal gardens, with his children playing nearby. He watched them with a gentle smile, knowing that one day they too would carry the burden of leadership. As the sun set, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Gin touched the medallion of valor, feeling its warmth. It was a reminder of his journey, his sacrifices, and the unity he had fought to preserve. "The medallion chose well," he murmured to himself, a deep contentment settling in his heart. Thus, the tale of Prince Gin, the medallion, and the dragon Rifarix became immortalized, a story of courage, forgiveness, and the true meaning of leadership. Before we move on to the next tale, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you. Our next tale is about the magical adventure of Nino. In a realm deep within the heart of the forest, hidden from human eyes, lay the magical world of Ilaria. This was a place where the air shimmered with sparkling dew, flowers sang in harmony, and fairies flitted about like tiny glowing stars. Nino, a 7-inch fairy boy with golden wings and bright emerald eyes, lived happily with his family and friends. His days were filled with laughter, mischief, and the magic that pulsed through every leaf and blade of grass. But one fateful evening, darkness descended on Ilaria. A sorcerer cloaked in shadow breached their sanctuary. His black magic ripped through the land, turning the vibrant colors to ash. Nino watched in horror as his family and friends were sealed into glass bottles, their cries of despair muffled by the enchantments. "Run, Nino!" his mother shouted as the sorcerer's tendrils of dark energy reached for him. With tears streaming down his cheeks, Nino fled, his wings carrying him far from the devastation. Exhausted, he crossed the veil between worlds and collapsed into the human realm, landing amidst the cold cobblestone streets of a bustling town. Nino woke to the sound of footsteps and the faint smell of bread. When he opened his eyes, he found himself staring at a pair of ragged boots. Looking up, he saw a young man with tangled hair and a kind but weathered face. "What are you?" the man asked, crouching down. I'm a fairy," Nino said weakly. "Who are you?" "My name is Eris. I live here," the man replied, gesturing to a makeshift shelter of crates and blankets in a nearby alley. "You're a beggar?" Nino asked innocently. Eris laughed softly. "You could say that. I don't have much, but it's home." Nino's heart ached for Eris. Despite his ragged appearance, the man's smile was warm and genuine. "You help me," Nino said, his tiny voice trembling. "Let me help you in return. I have magic." Eris tilted his head skeptically. "Magic?" Nino fluttered to his feet, his wings glowing faintly. With a wave of his hand, he conjured a loaf of fresh bread and a pitcher of water. Eris stared, wide-eyed. "You really are magic," Eris whispered. From that moment on, Nino and Eris became inseparable. Over the weeks, Nino used his magic to ease Eris's burdens. He created warm blankets for the cold nights, mended Eris's tattered clothes, and even entertained the townsfolk with dazzling light shows, earning them coins. One evening, as they sat by a fire, Eris looked at Nino with a curious expression. "Why are you helping me so much?" Nino hesitated, his gaze dropping to the flames. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything. My family, they're gone, taken by an evil sorcerer." Eris's eyes softened. "I'm so sorry, Nino. I want to save them, but I'm too small," Nino admitted. Eris placed a hand on his chest. "You're not alone anymore. We'll find a way to save them. I promise." Nino's magic continued to transform Eris's life. With Nino's guidance, Eris began helping others in the town, using the wealth they earned to feed the hungry and shelter the homeless. The townsfolk grew to love him, and soon word of his kindness spread. One day a delegation from the kingdom arrived. They offered Eris a position in the royal court. "You have the heart of a leader," they said. "Our king is old and without an heir. Will you help us bring hope to the land?" Eris glanced at Nino, who nodded encouragingly. "This is your chance," Nino said. With Nino's help, Eris became a wise and benevolent king, transforming the kingdom into a place of peace and prosperity. But even amidst his newfound power, Eris never forgot Nino's pain. After Eris took the crown, things seemed to calm down in the kingdom. But Nino's heart remained restless, haunted by the fate of his family. He still couldn't shake the darkness that had fallen upon Ilaria. One evening, as Eris and Nino sat in the royal garden, the skies darkened. A gust of wind carried a low, ominous laugh. The shadows shifted unnaturally, twisting into a familiar form, Velkaris. "You think you can escape me?" Velkaris's voice echoed through the air. "The kingdom's king is nothing but a pawn, and you, Nino, you will regret crossing me." Before they could react, the sorcerer's dark magic erupted from the ground, sending shockwaves through the castle. Eris quickly drew his sword, but the energy was too strong. It created a barrier, trapping the castle within a dome of pure darkness. Nino's wings fluttered in panic. "We have to stop him, Eris. He's too powerful on his own." Eris turned to Nino, his face serious. "We won't face him alone. We need allies, we need strength, real strength. Together, we'll find a way." Nino and Eris knew that to face Velkaris, they couldn't rely on magic alone. They needed help, true warriors and wise beings from distant lands. First, they visited Sir Alaric, the brave knight who had once aided Eris in battle. Sir Alaric, now a trusted general in the royal army, was quick to offer his sword. "The sorcerer threatens us all. I'll fight beside you to protect this kingdom," he vowed. Next, they traveled to the remote mountains where the legendary mage, Ilara, lived. Ilara was known for her mastery over the ancient magics, but her reclusive nature made her difficult to find. After a long search, Nino's magic guided them to a hidden cave where Ilara was meditating. "I've sensed the disturbance for some time," Ilara said, her silver hair shimmering in the moonlight. "I will lend you my power. But remember, to defeat Velkaris, you must first understand the nature of his darkness." Lastly, Nino and Eris went to the enchanted forests to speak with the creatures of the wild, including Lyra, a swift and cunning thief who had once helped them escape the dangers of the human world. "I owe you both," Lyra said, grinning. "Count me in." With their newfound allies, Nino and Eris prepared for the greatest battle of their lives. Velkaris' fortress lay beyond the Forbidden Mountains, in a desolate land known as the Shadow Realm. The land was cursed, with no sunlight and twisted creatures that lurked in the shadows. To reach the sorcerer's lair, Nino and his companions had to cross this barren wasteland. Their journey was filled with peril. The first trial was a dense fog that clouded their minds, making it difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. Creatures of the dark tried to lure them into traps, using their deepest fears against them. Eris was the first to fall victim to the illusions. He saw himself sitting on the throne, but the crown weighed heavily on his head. He was surrounded by empty courtiers, their eyes hollow. "I am nothing but a king of shadows," he whispered. But Nino flew up to him, his magic glowing brightly. "Eris, look at me. You are no shadow. You're the light for these people." The illusion shattered, and Eris regained his focus. "Thank you, Nino. I almost lost myself." The next trial was an ancient riddle told by a giant stone golem. "To pass, you must solve the puzzle of time." The golem's deep voice rumbled. Nino and Elara worked together, combining Nino's intuition and Elara's knowledge of ancient magic. After hours of contemplation, they finally solved the riddle, and the golem allowed them to pass. At last, they reached the towering fortress. The walls were made of jagged black stone, and the air crackled with dark magic. "We've come this far," Nino said, determination in his eyes. "Now we must finish what we started." But Velkaris was prepared. As they approached, the gates of the fortress opened, revealing an army of shadow creatures, warped beasts and twisted warriors, all under the sorcerer's control. Nino's magic flared as he and Eris led their allies into battle. The knights charged, cutting through the shadow creatures with precision, while Lyra darted around, disabling traps. Elara cast powerful spells, warding off the dark magic that surged toward them. But Velkaris himself was waiting for them in the heart of the fortress. "You truly believe you can defeat me?" he sneered, his black robes swirling like a storm. "We don't have to defeat you alone," Eris said, his voice firm. "We fight as one." The battle with Velkaris was fierce, the clash of magic and steel echoing through the halls of the fortress. Velkaris conjured blasts of dark energy, while Nino countered with dazzling light magic. But the sorcerer's strength was overwhelming. Just when it seemed like they were losing, Eris called upon the power of the people he had vowed to protect. The entire kingdom, under the influence of his light and leadership, rallied to their cause. The villagers, the soldiers, and the creatures of the forest all joined the battle, lending their strength to the fight. The turning point came when Nino, filled with a deep, unshakable bond to Eris and his people, summoned the purest form of his magic. It wasn't just light, it was the collective hope and courage of everyone who believed in them. As the light poured from Nino, it enveloped Velkaris, breaking through his dark magic. The sorcerer screamed as his own darkness was turned against him. "No! I cannot be undone!" he cried. But it was too late. The light overwhelmed him, shattering the dark magic he had wielded for so long. Velkaris collapsed, defeated. "You have ruined me," he whispered. Eris stepped forward, his sword raised high. "It's not ruin, it's redemption." With a final burst of magic, Velkaris' power was sealed, and the fortress crumbled around them. The shadows lifted from the land, and the skies above the kingdom cleared. With Velkaris defeated and Ilaria restored, Nino and his friends returned to the forest. The bond between the two worlds was stronger than ever. Eris, now a just and noble king, ruled the kingdom with wisdom and compassion. But for Nino, his journey wasn't over. He returned to Ilaria, where his family welcomed him back with open arms. Together, they rebuilt their village, and the fairies of Ilaria flourished once again. "Thank you, Eris," Nino said, standing by the edge of the enchanted forest. "You helped me find my way home." Eris smiled, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "We both found our way home, Nino, together." And so, the tale of Nino and Eris lived on, a story of friendship, redemption, and the enduring power of hope that united both worlds. Our next tale is about the magical world of the hat. The rain had been relentless all morning, a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with Dylan's growing restlessness. He stood by the window, watching as muddy rivulets carved paths through their garden, turning the usually lively village of Meadowvale into a soggy canvas of grey. "Mom!" Dylan called, turning away from the view. "What can I do? I've finished all my chores." Clara, his mother, didn't even look up from the dough she was kneading on the counter. "You could help me with dinner preparations," she suggested lightly. Dylan scrunched up his nose. "I already peeled potatoes yesterday. Can't I do something fun?" Clara chuckled softly, her hands expertly folding and stretching the dough. "Fun, huh? You're creative. Find something to do. Maybe start a drawing or read one of the books in the sitting room." "I've read them all," Dylan sighed, plopping down on a chair. "What about the attic? I've never really gone through everything up there." The rhythmic kneading paused as Clara glanced over at her son. "The attic?" she repeated, her brow furrowing. "There's not much up there but dust and old furniture. Most of it belonged to your grandfather." "That's what makes it interesting," Dylan said, his brown eyes lighting up. "Please, I'll be careful." Clara hesitated, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "All right, but no dragging anything heavy down here. And don't bring back any spiders, Dylan. I mean it." "I won't," Dylan called as he bolted for the stairs. The attic was a part of the house that had always held a strange allure for Dylan. The narrow staircase creaked under his weight as he climbed, and the door at the top stuck stubbornly before giving way with a groan. He shone his flashlight into the dim space, illuminating a world of forgotten memories. The beams of light danced over boxes stacked high against the slanted roof, draped furniture, and knickknacks strewn haphazardly. Dust motes swirled in the air, catching the glow of the flashlight and making the attic feel otherworldly. "This place is huge," Dylan murmured to himself as he stepped inside. He began poking through the boxes, finding items that ranged from mundane to bizarre. There were faded photographs of people he didn't recognize, tools whose purpose he couldn't begin to guess, and stacks of old journals written in his grandfather's looping script. But it wasn't until he reached the far corner of the attic that he found the chest. It was smaller than the others, but it immediately caught his eye. The carvings on its surface were intricate, almost alive, and the initials JR were etched into the wood with care. "Grandpa's chest," Dylan whispered, running his fingers over the smooth, worn surface. He knelt down and fiddled with the latch. It resisted at first, but after a bit of effort, the chest creaked open. The scent of cedar and something faintly magical wafted out. Inside, neatly arranged, were a collection of objects. A brass compass, a leather-bound journal, a pair of gloves with strange runes stitched into the fabric, and finally, a hat. The hat was unlike anything Dylan had ever seen. It was black, with a wide brim that seemed to absorb the light, and a vibrant red feather that glowed faintly even in the dim attic. "What are you doing here?" Dylan said half to himself as he picked it up. The hat was heavier than it looked, its fabric smooth and warm to the touch. The moment he placed it on his head, the world around him shifted. The attic blurred, its wooden walls melting away like candle wax. Dylan stumbled, grabbing at the air as vibrant colors swirled around him. A strange humming filled his ears, growing louder and louder until... Silence. Dylan opened his eyes. He was no longer in the attic. Dylan found himself standing in the middle of a vibrant marketplace, bustling with life and energy. Stalls lined the streets, their tables overflowing with goods that seemed plucked from dreams. fruits that glowed with an inner light, trinkets that hovered a few inches above their surfaces, and potions bubbling in crystalline flasks. The air smelled of spices, sweet and sharp, mingling with the earthy scent of cobblestones warmed by an unseen sun. "Where am I?" Dylan whispered, gripping the hat in his hands as he turned in a slow circle. "You there," came a sharp voice. Dylan spun around to see a barrel-shaped man with tusks glaring at him. The man was carrying a stack of crates, his face red with effort. "Move it, kid," the man barked, huffing as he shuffled past. "Sorry," Dylan muttered, stepping aside. "Oi, you look lost," said a much friendlier voice. Dylan turned again, this time facing a tiny creature standing atop a nearby crate. The creature was barely 2 feet tall, with blue fur, oversized ears, and a pair of spectacles perched on its button nose. It wore a miniature vest and a bow tie, giving it a scholarly air. "First time in Hat Haven, eh?" the creature said, grinning widely. "Hat Haven," Dylan repeated. "That's right, the magical world within the hat." The creature hopped down from the crate, landing gracefully on the cobblestones. "I'm Pippin, guide extraordinaire, and you must be the new hat bearer." "The what?" Dylan asked, his mind spinning. Pippin's grin faltered. "Oh dear, you don't know, do you?" Dylan shook his head, clutching the hat tighter. "Well, it's a good thing you found me," Pippin said, puffing out his chest. "The hat is no ordinary piece of headwear, my boy. It's ancient, powerful, and it's chosen you." "Chosen me for what?" "Why, to protect Hat Haven, of course," Pippin said. "Come, I'll explain everything." Before Dylan could protest, Pippin grabbed his hand and began leading him through the market. As Dylan followed Pippin through the bustling marketplace of Hat Haven, his senses were overwhelmed. The sights, sounds, and smells were unlike anything he had ever experienced. Floating lanterns bobbed in the air, casting multicolored lights that shifted with the rhythm of laughter and chatter. A vendor sold flowers that changed colors when touched, while a nearby musician played a harp that sang with voices instead of strings. "This place is amazing," Dylan breathed, his head swiveling to take it all in. "It is," Pippin said proudly, "and as the new hat bearer, it's your job to protect it." Dylan frowned, his excitement dimming slightly. "Protect it from what?" "From threats both within and beyond," Pippin said cryptically. "Hat Haven thrives because of the balance your grandfather maintained. But ever since since he left us, things have been unstable." "My grandfather," Dylan repeated, his voice soft. "He was from here?" "Not exactly," Pippin replied, leading Dylan down a quieter street lined with shimmering crystalline trees. "He came from your world just like you, but the hat chose him, and he became one of the greatest protectors Hat Haven has ever known." They arrived at a grand hall, its facade made of what appeared to be living stone that shifted and shimmered like water. Above the arched entrance was a mural depicting a man with a striking resemblance to Dylan. "That's him," Dylan whispered, staring at the image of his grandfather. "Jasper Reed," Pippin said, his tone reverent. "He was a legend." The hall was filled with artifacts and murals, each telling a piece of Jasper's story. One depicted him wielding the hat against shadowy figures, light radiating from him as the darkness recoiled. Another showed him standing atop a hill, the hat glowing like a beacon, as the people of Hat Haven cheered below. "He looked so brave," Dylan said, a pang of doubt creeping into his chest. "I'm not like him." "Neither was he at first," Pippin said gently, "but he learned, and so will you." As they explored the hall, Pippin explained more about Hat Haven and the hat's powers. "The hat connects our worlds," he said. "It's a portal, a shield, and a weapon all in one. But it's also a part of you now. It will respond to your thoughts and emotions, so be careful what you wish for." Dylan reached up to touch the hat, feeling its warmth. "And the threats you mentioned, what are they?" Pippin's cheerful demeanor darkened. "The biggest threat is the Shadow Collector, a creature that feeds on magic. It was defeated once thanks to your grandfather, but it's been stirring again. Some say it's looking for a way back." Dylan's grip on the hat tightened. If it's coming back, what am I supposed to do? I don't know anything about fighting or magic. You won't be alone, Pippin assured him. There are people here who will help you, just as they helped Jasper. Speaking of which, Pippin led Dylan to a nearby garden where a group of people were gathered. Meet your new allies, Pippin said with a flourish. The garden was a lush, vibrant space filled with plants that glowed softly in the twilight. At the center of the garden stood a tall, graceful woman with hair that shimmered like moonlight. She turned as Dylan and Pippin approached, her emerald green eyes kind but piercing. "This is Lyra," Pippin said, introducing her. "She's a healer and one of Hathaven's most respected guardians." Lyra extended a hand to Dylan. "You must be Jasper's grandson. It's an honor to meet you." Thanks," Dylan said, shaking her hand. "I don't know how much help I'll be, though. We all start somewhere," Lyra said with a smile. "Your grandfather was once a beginner, too." Before Dylan could respond, a voice interrupted. "So this is the new hat bearer, huh?" A boy around Dylan's age stepped forward, his fiery red hair matching his fiery expression. He wore armor that gleamed even in the dim light, and his sword hung casually at his side. "This is Jax," Pippin said, rolling his eyes. "Don't let his attitude fool you. He's actually quite skilled." "I'll believe it when I see it," Jax said, crossing his arms. "Your grandfather was a legend, but you don't look like much." Dylan bristled. "I didn't ask for this, you know." "Exactly my point," Jax said with a smirk. "Enough, Jax," Lyra said firmly. "We're here to help Dylan, not tear him down." Jax muttered something under his breath but backed off. As the days passed, Dylan began training with Lyra, Jax, and Pippin. Lyra taught him about the magical properties of plants and how to use them for healing and defense. Jax, though initially reluctant, trained Dylan in combat, teaching him how to wield the hat as a weapon. "You've got potential," Jax admitted grudgingly after a particularly intense sparring session. "Thanks, I guess," Dylan said, wiping sweat from his brow. But not everyone in Hathaven welcomed Dylan. Rumors of the Shadow Collector's return spread like wildfire, and some whispered that Dylan's presence might bring more harm than good. "Don't listen to them," Pippin told Dylan one evening. "They're just scared. You'll prove them wrong, just like your grandfather did." Dylan nodded, but the doubts lingered. Dylan's first major test came when a powerful artifact, the Crystal of Balance, was stolen from Hathaven's archives. Without it, the magic that sustained their world would begin to unravel. "The Shadow Collector's minions must be behind this," Lyra said, her voice tense. "We have to get it back," Jack said, already strapping on his armor. Their search led them to the Whispering Woods, a treacherous forest filled with illusions and traps. As they ventured deeper, the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches whispering secrets and taunts. "Stay close," Pippin warned. "The forest feeds on fear." The group faced numerous challenges, from navigating shifting paths to fending off shadowy creatures. Dylan discovered a new power within the hat, allowing him to create barriers of light that repelled the shadows. "You're getting the hang of it," Lyra said encouragingly. By the time they retrieved the crystal, Dylan felt a newfound sense of confidence, but the forest had taken its toll, and tensions within the group began to surface. The group's triumphant return from the Whispering Woods was short-lived. Despite retrieving the Crystal of Balance, the atmosphere in Hathaven remained tense. Whispers of the Shadow Collector's resurgence grew louder, and the once vibrant streets seemed dimmer, as though the magic itself was flickering. Dylan couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching him. "I don't like this," he admitted to Pippin one evening as they sat on the roof of the inn where they were staying. The view overlooked Hathaven's glowing skyline, but even the ever-changing lights of the city couldn't ease his nerves. "What don't you like?" Pippin asked, his ears twitching as he nibbled on a piece of candied fruit. "Everything," Dylan said, resting his chin on his knees. "The way people look at me, the way the shadows seem thicker, and this hat." He pulled the hat off his head and stared at it. "It feels heavier every day." "That's the weight of responsibility," Pippin said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "But you're stronger than you think, Dylan. You've already done more than most would in your position." Dylan sighed, setting the hat aside. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm just pretending." Before Pippin could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. "It's Lyra," a calm voice called. Dylan climbed down from the roof and opened the door. Lyra stood there, her expression grim. "We have a problem," she said. The problem turned out to be an attack on the outskirts of Hathaven. When the group arrived, they found a small village in ruins. Homes were reduced to smoldering piles of rubble, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt wood. "Who could have done this?" Dylan asked, his voice trembling as he took in the destruction. Lyra knelt beside a set of tracks in the dirt. "Shadow beasts," she said, her voice low. "They're getting bolder," Jack said, gripping the hilt of his sword. "This close to Hathaven? It's like they're taunting us." Dylan felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you think the Shadow Collector is back?" Lyra hesitated before nodding. "It's possible. The signs are all there. We need to act quickly if we're going to stop it." "Where do we start?" Dylan asked, clutching the hat tightly. Lyra pointed to the horizon, where dark clouds churned ominously. "The Veil Rift. It's a tear in the fabric of our world, and it's been dormant for decades. If the Shadow Collector is returning, it'll be through there." The journey to the Veil Rift was long and perilous. The group encountered countless obstacles, from treacherous terrain to ambushes by shadow beasts. Dylan's training was put to the test as he used the hat's powers to shield his friends and light their path through the darkness. One night, as they camped in a sheltered glade, Dylan sat with Jax by the fire. "You've gotten better," Jax said, poking at the flames with a stick. "Thanks," Dylan said, surprised by the compliment. "But don't let it go to your head," Jax added with a smirk. "You've still got a long way to go." Dylan rolled his eyes. "Why do you always have to be like that?" "Like what?" "Arrogant, dismissive. You act like I'm not good enough no matter what I do." Jax was silent for a moment, staring into the fire. "You remind me of my brother," he said finally. Dylan blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected admission. "Your brother?" "He was a hat-bearer too," Jack said, his voice quieter now. "But he didn't make it. He tried to fight the Shadow Collector on his own, and it cost him everything." "I'm sorry," Dylan said, his earlier annoyance fading. Jack shook his head. "Don't be. It's not your fault. But it's why I'm hard on you. I don't want to lose someone else to the shadows." "I won't let that happen," Dylan promised. As they drew closer to the Veil Rift, the environment became increasingly hostile. The sky darkened, and the air grew colder with each passing mile. The land itself seemed to resist their progress, with shifting paths and illusions that tested their resolve. At one point, they found themselves trapped in a maze of thorny vines that seemed to grow faster than they could cut them down. "This is impossible!" Dylan exclaimed, dodging a snapping vine. "Use the hat!" Pippin shouted from a safe distance. Dylan closed his eyes and focused, willing the hat to create a path. The brim of the hat glowed, and a beam of light shot out, burning a hole through the maze. "Nice work," Jack said as they hurried through the opening. When they finally reached the Veil Rift, it was unlike anything Dylan had ever seen. The tear in reality was a swirling vortex of shadows and light, crackling with energy that made the ground tremble beneath their feet. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the rift. "And that," Jack said, pointing to a figure emerging from the vortex, "is the Shadow Collector." The creature was monstrous, a shifting mass of darkness with glowing red eyes that pierced through the gloom. Its voice was a guttural growl, filled with malice. "You dare to challenge me?" it snarled, its form towering over them. Dylan felt the hat pulse in his hands, as though it recognized the creature. "We're not afraid of you!" Jack shouted, stepping forward with his sword raised. The Shadow Collector laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Dylan's spine. "Then you will die like the others." Dylan took a deep breath and placed the hat on his head. The world around him seemed to slow as the hat's magic surged through him. He could feel its power, vast and ancient, guiding his movements as he stepped forward to face the creature. "Not today," he said, his voice steady. The shadow collector loomed before them, its form an ever-shifting mass of darkness that seemed to devour the light around it. Dylan gripped the hat tightly, his heart pounding. He could feel its magic coursing through him, steadying his nerves and giving him the courage to stand firm. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice calm but resolute. She drew her staff, the crystal at its tip glowing brightly. "Dylan, you'll need to focus. The hat is our strongest weapon against the shadow collector." "No pressure," Dylan muttered, adjusting the brim of the hat on his head. Jax unsheathed his sword, its blade gleaming with enchanted runes. "We'll cover you," he said, stepping forward. "Just do what you do best." Pippin, perched on Dylan's shoulder, whispered, "Don't forget, Dylan, the hat responds to your thoughts and emotions. Trust yourself." The shadow collector let out a low, menacing growl. "You think you can defeat me, boy? Your grandfather barely managed to contain me. You are nothing compared to him." Dylan clenched his fists. "I'm not my grandfather," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm not nothing either." The shadow collector roared, and the battle began. The creature unleashed a torrent of shadows, tendrils of darkness lashing out at the group. Dylan raised the hat instinctively, and a barrier of light sprang up around them, deflecting the attack. "Nice work!" Jack shouted, charging forward to engage the shadow collector. His sword clashed against the tendrils, cutting through them with bursts of light. Lyra chanted a spell, her staff radiating energy that slowed the creature's movements. Dylan used the hat to focus its power. "We need to weaken it before it grows stronger." Dylan nodded, his mind racing. He closed his eyes and concentrated, picturing the hat as a beacon of light. He felt its energy respond, growing brighter and hotter in his hands. When he opened his eyes, the hat's brim glowed like molten gold. Dylan pointed it at the shadow collector, and a beam of light shot out, striking the creature in the chest. The shadow collector howled, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. "You'll pay for that!" it snarled, its red eyes narrowing on Dylan. It lunged at him, a wave of darkness crashing down like a tidal wave. Dylan braced himself, but before the attack could reach him, Jax jumped in front, slashing through the shadows with his sword. "Stay focused, Dylan!" Jax yelled, his voice strained. Pippin leapt from Dylan's shoulder and landed on the ground, pulling a small pouch from his belt. He scattered a sparkling powder into the air, creating a protective circle around them. "This should buy us some time!" "Time for what?" Dylan asked, his voice trembling. "For you to finish this," Pippin said, his usual cheer replaced by urgency. The shadow collector shifted its attention back to Dylan, its form condensing into a more humanoid shape. It towered over him, its red eyes burning with fury. "You cannot destroy me," it said, its voice echoing like 1,000 whispers. "I am the darkness in all things, the fear in every heart. I am eternal." Dylan swallowed hard, but didn't back down. "Maybe you're right," he said, gripping the hat tightly. "Maybe I can't destroy you, but I can stop you." He placed the hat on his head once more, and the world seemed to slow. He could feel the connection between himself and the hat deepening, as if it were showing him its true power. Images flashed through his mind. His grandfather, Jasper Reed, standing tall against the shadow collector. The people of Hat Haven cheering as light filled the skies. His family back home, their love giving him strength. The hat whispered to him, its voice gentle but firm. "Believe in yourself, Dylan. You have everything you need." Dylan raised his hand, and the hat's magic surged outward. The light it emitted was not just a weapon, it was hope, warmth, and love. It spread across the battlefield, driving back the shadows and illuminating the darkness. The shadow collector screamed, its form unraveling under the onslaught of light. "No, this cannot be." "You're wrong," Dylan said, stepping forward. "Light always defeats darkness." With one final burst of energy, the hat's light engulfed the shadow collector completely. For a moment, everything was silent. When the light faded, the shadow collector was gone. The veil rift, once a chaotic vortex, was now a calm, shimmering portal that seemed to hum with balance and harmony. Dylan collapsed to his knees, exhausted but triumphant. "You did it," Lyra said, helping him to his feet. Jax sheathed his sword, a rare smile on his face. "Not bad, kid." Pippin bounded over, his fur singed but his grin intact. "I always knew you had it in you." Dylan looked at the hat in his hands, its glow dimming as if it too was tired. "Did I really do it?" "You didn't just do it," Lyra said, her voice filled with pride. "You saved Hat Haven." As they returned to the city, the people of Hat Haven cheered for Dylan, their new hero. But Dylan couldn't help thinking of his grandfather, wondering if he was watching from somewhere beyond the veil. In the weeks that followed, Dylan adjusted to his new role as the Hat Bearer. He trained regularly with Lyra and Jax, learning more about the Hat's powers and the history of Hat Haven. But eventually, it was time for him to return home. "You'll always have a place here," Lyra said, as she hugged him goodbye. "Don't get into too much trouble without me," Jax said, smirking. "And don't forget to visit," Pippin added, tears shining in his eyes. Dylan smiled, placing the hat on his head. "I'll be back, I promise." With that, he returned to his world, finding himself back in the attic of his family's house. But the magic of the hat stayed with him, a constant reminder of the adventure that had changed his life forever. As he placed the hat in a safe spot, he whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." The hat glowed faintly in response, as if acknowledging his words. And so the legacy of the Hat Bearer continued, with Dylan ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, both in Hat Haven and beyond. Are you enjoying the tales so far? Before we dive into our final exciting story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give this video a like, share it with others, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the adventure going. Our last tale is about the Hungry Prince. In the bustling kingdom of Glenhaven, prosperity flourished under the reign of King Alden. The land was bountiful, and its people lived in peace. Yet, amidst this harmony, one thorn pricked the heart of the kingdom, Prince Cedric, the youngest of the king's 5 children. Cedric was charming, intelligent, and brave, but he had one glaring flaw, an unquenchable appetite. While his brothers and sisters trained in arts, governance, and swordsmanship, Cedric's passion lay in devouring meals fit for armies. Every day, the royal chefs worked tirelessly to meet Cedric's endless demands. Breakfast featured towers of pancakes dripping with honey, lunch boasted roasts and pies, and dinner was an extravagant banquet. Even late at night, Cedric would raid the kitchens for more. The kingdom's advisors warned him repeatedly, "Your Highness, your indulgence is wasteful. Our granaries cannot support such gluttony indefinitely." But Cedric scoffed, "There is no end to Glenhaven's wealth. Why should I not enjoy it?" His greed reached its peak during the annual harvest festival. When a grand feast was prepared for the villagers, Cedric took most of it for himself, leaving scraps for his people. Anger rippled through the town, but Cedric remained oblivious. Unbeknownst to him, a wise fairy named Marisol had been watching. The prince must learn the consequences of his greed, she decided. That night, as Cedric slumbered in his luxurious chamber, Marisol appeared. She waved her wand, and a soft golden mist swirled around the room. The prince stirred, but did not wake. When morning came, Cedric opened his eyes, expecting to see his canopy bed. Instead, he found himself perched on the branch of a towering tree. His hands and feet were replaced with claws, and his royal robes had vanished, replaced by dull feathers. He tried to shout, but all that came out was a sharp chirp. Panicking, he fluttered down to the ground. That was when Marisol appeared before him, her shimmering wings glowing in the dawn light. "Prince Cedric," she began, "your greed has blinded you to the needs of your people. You have wasted what could have fed hundreds. Until you learn to appreciate what you have and show compassion, you shall remain in this form, a bird with a shallow beak, unable to eat easily or defend yourself." Cedric squawked in protest. "Please change me back, I promise to change." Marisol shook her head. Words are not enough. Actions speak louder. Prove that you have learned, and only then will the curse be lifted." She vanished, leaving Cedric to face the challenges of his new form. Cedric quickly discovered the harshness of his new reality. As a bird, his shallow beak made it nearly impossible to eat most food. He could only peck at the softest berries and insects, which were scarce in the dense forest. Hunger gnawed at him constantly. He stumbled upon a bush laden with ripe berries, but before he could eat, a flock of larger birds chased him away. Exhausted and starving, he realized how difficult survival was. On the second day, his hunger drove him to a nearby field where villagers were harvesting crops. He saw crumbs on the ground and eagerly hopped forward. But the moment the villagers spotted him, they exclaimed, "What a strange bird! Catch it!" Cedric narrowly escaped, his heart pounding. He now understood the fear of being hunted. No longer was he the powerful prince. He was prey, vulnerable and alone. Days turned into weeks, and Cedric faced endless trials. Larger birds, like hawks and eagles, hunted him relentlessly. He learned to hide in dense foliage, staying silent and still to avoid detection. One fateful day, a storm rolled in. The wind howled and rain battered the forest. Cedric, cold and drenched, sought refuge under a tree. He shivered through the night, longing for the warmth of his palace. "Is this how others suffer?" he thought. Memories of villagers begging for food during the harvest festival haunted him. He had laughed at their plight, yet here he was, struggling to survive. Weakened by hunger and despair, Cedric collapsed one evening in a meadow. A flock of sparrows found him and approached cautiously. One sparrow, Lila, spoke up. "Are you all right, stranger?" Cedric, too tired to lie, told them his story. The sparrows, moved by his honesty, decided to help. "You've been selfish," Lila said, "but everyone deserves a second chance. We'll teach you how to find food and survive." Over time, Cedric learned from the sparrows. They showed him how to find nectar, peck at seeds, and avoid predators. In return, Cedric helped gather food and protected the smaller sparrows from harm. For the first time, he experienced the joy of community and sharing. As Cedric worked alongside the sparrows, he began to change. His once selfish heart grew humble and kind. He saw the struggles of the sparrows and realized how blind he had been to the needs of his people. One day, while helping Lila gather berries, he said, "Thank you for your kindness. I don't deserve it after the way I've lived." Lila smiled. "Change begins with acknowledgement. You're on the right path." Cedric reflected on her words. He vowed that if he ever returned to his human form, he would devote his life to helping others. One morning, as Cedric perched on a tree branch, deep in thought, a golden light bathed the forest. Marisol appeared once more, her expression warm yet firm. "Prince Cedric," she said, her voice echoing softly, "your time in this form has been long. Have you learned the lessons of humility and compassion?" Cedric bowed his head, his voice trembling with sincerity. "Yes, Marisol, I have come to understand the struggles of those who go without. The life I led was selfish, blind to the needs of others. I see now that true happiness comes from sharing and supporting one another. If I am given a second chance, I will dedicate my life to serving my people." The fairy studied him for a moment, her eyes searching for any trace of lingering arrogance. Satisfied, she smiled. "You have shown not just understanding, but also action. Your time among the sparrows proved your willingness to change. The bonds you formed and the help you offered are evidence of your growth. It is time for you to return to who you were, but with a renewed heart." Marisol waved her wand, and Cedric's feathered form glowed brightly. He felt warmth surge through him as the transformation began. Feathers dissolved into flesh, claws became hands, and his shallow beak softened back into human lips. When the light faded, Cedric stood once more as a man, though leaner and humbler than before. "I will not fail again," Cedric whispered, his voice filled with resolve. When Cedric returned to the palace, his family was overjoyed, but noticed a profound change in him. Gone was the arrogant prince. In his place stood a man of compassion and wisdom. He immediately set to work, redistributing the kingdom's resources and ensuring no one went hungry again. The kitchens that once fed only the royal family were now open to the poor. Cedric also built shelters for travelers, granaries for storing surplus food, and schools to educate villagers on sustainable living. He personally visited towns and villages, listening to the needs of his people. The kingdom flourished under his new leadership, and the people came to love their prince not for his charm, but for his kindness. He became known far and wide as Cedric the Benevolent, a leader who had learned that true greatness lies not in taking, but in giving. In a world where abundance and prosperity often blind us to the needs of others, there are lessons we must learn the hard way. Some of us seek to satisfy our desires without thought, never realizing that our actions can leave others in want. This is the story of Prince Cedric, a young man who, in his endless hunger, took more than he needed and learned that true fulfillment comes not from excess, but from balance and selflessness. Through his journey, Cedric discovered that to truly prosper, one must not only care for oneself, but also share what one has with others. Greed, unchecked, can lead to loss, not only of resources, but of compassion, trust, and even the very things we hold most dear. Only by recognizing the value of restraint, gratitude, and giving can we find the path to true happiness. Let this tale serve as a reminder. When we take more than our fair share, there is always a cost. But when we choose to give, even a little, we enrich the lives of those around us and ourselves. And that is the end of our tales for today's video. This is Mr.VinzTales. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comment section. See you in our next tales.